Okay. All right. Chag Sameach. This is very nice. Thank you for all the food, both what was sponsored and both what was ma'alum ever what was sponsored, and for the Shimon for hosting. So this week, we're in Masechet Arachin, and we're discussing a sugya that discusses lashon hara. So we're going to be dealing with that next few weeks. And tonight, what I'd like to talk about, I'll start with a question that maybe kind of leads to the end. Sukkot, we talk about what is Sukkot actually meant to commemorate, like in Yana Diyoma, so it commemorates us leaving Mitzrayim somehow, right? But Sukkot Shabbat Mitzrayim. So just a question I would pose is, when you picture Kriyat Yamsuf, when Bnei Yisrael were actually leaving Eretz Mitzrayim, so how do you picture Yamsuf having happened? Okay, you have Bnei Yisrael next to the shore, and you have the Egyptians coming behind them, and then what actually happened, if you could just describe it?
They go into the water. Well, I mean,
they go into the water, it splits,
But then what they actually do is they do a sivuv, right?
Okay, so we're going to discuss that whole thing.
That kind of doesn't matter. You'd expect them to go through to the other side.
Right. Okay, so we're going to touch on the whole sivuv thing. But before that, I'm going to propose, kind of in a roundabout way, I think a chiddush that I think Rashi makes. I wasn't able to find an earlier source, but it's quite an interesting chiddush, and I want to propose, I think, what's motivating him. And it's a really interesting idea. The background for all of this is going to be a Gemara, which is trying to understand the pasuk by the Chet Meraglim, where when Hashem is talking to Moshe about why the Meraglim complaining and so he says, "Vayinasu oti ze 10 pa'amim v'lo shamu b'koli." Right, the Bnei Yisrael have tested me 10 times and they haven't listened to my voice, and that's part of Hashem's complaint against the people. So the Gemara wants to understand, what are these 10 times? It assumes it means that there were 10 instances up until and including Chet Meraglim of actual instances that you can point to and say, this is when Bnei Yisrael tested God. And so it goes through the list. Okay, so this is the Gemara in Arachin Daf Tet Vav Amraf. We'll see a few different versions and analyze the differences between them. Tanya, Amar Rabbi Yehuda. Eser Nisionot Nisu Avotenu L'Kadosh Baruch Hu. Okay, this is what we just said, that our forefathers tested HaKadosh Baruch Hu 10 times. Shnayim Bayam, twice at Yamsuf, Shnayim Bamayim, 2 times in regards to water, Shnayim Baman, twice in regards to the man, Shnayim Baslav, twice in regards to quail, Chad Be'egel, V'echad Be'midbar Paran. Okay, and then we'll go through, we'll just read this quickly, because the details of the drashot are less relevant, but we'll go through it. So Shnayim Bayam, so what are the 2 times at Yamsuf? Achad B'yirida, V'echad B'aliyah. Once when they went into the Yamsuf, and once when they came out. B'yirida K'tiv, when they went in, it says, Hamibli En Kfarim B'mitzrayim. This is a pasuk that Bnei Yisrael, when they get to the edge of the water and they see the Egyptians behind them, they come and they say, are there not enough graves in Egypt? So they're questioning, God's ability to take them out. Ba'aliyah K'dravuna. And then what about when they came out of Yamsuf? Right, ostensibly I would say, what do you mean? When they came out of Yamsuf, that's Az Yashir. Vayiminu B'Hashem Moshe Avdo. Where's the test? So it's not a pasuk, it's a midrash. K'dravuna. Dam Ravuna, Yisrael she'be'oto hador mikatnei amana hayu. That the Jews in that generation were lacking in faith, which is especially ironic statement, considering, like we just said, right before Az Yashir, it says, Vayaminu B'Hashem Moshe Avdo. They had Amunah. So what does this really mean? K'derabba bar Mari. Dam Rabba bar Mari. Why does it say in Tehillim, Vayamru al yam beyamsuf? There's a pasuk in Tehillim that says that they rebelled at Yamsuf. Vayoshiem leman shemo, but Hashem redeemed them anyway for the sake of His name. Melamed sheYisrael mamrim be'ota sha'ah, that the Jews were rebelling at that time. Ve'omrim kashem she'anu olim mitzad zeh, kach Mitzrayim olim mitzad acher. So they're saying, okay, the sea split, we're coming out. But also the Egyptians are coming out on the other side, right? Hashem is
when the Egyptians got spat out, to show them that wasn't true.
That's the right. That's the answer. That God did that in order to quash this.
So this was one of their complaints, is they were saying that they also going to survive.
Right. That the complaint is that Hashem is also saving them and not just saving us. And you're getting to the answer already. Amar lo Kadosh Baruch Hu l'sar shel yam ploto tam le'yabasha. So Hashem said to the prince angel of the sea, okay, spit out the Egyptians so that Bnei Yisrael can see their bodies and know that right? And the context, of course, is Vayar Yisrael Mitzrayim meta sfat hayam. And through that led to Az Yashir. Okay, just skipping a few lines, there's a back and forth between the angel and between Hashem. Okay, Shnayim Bamayim, 5 lines up from the bottom at the end, okay? So those are the 2 by the Yam. twice by water. What are the twice? B'mara v'rufidim. Okay, b'mara dichtiv v'yavo marata v'lo yachlu lishtot. Okay, there's a story of by Mara where Bnei Yisrael went and they didn't have water, and he threw in the water, the wood, and it sweetened the water. Okay, uchtiv v'yalin am al Moshe. Okay, and the people complained. And what about b'rufidim? V'yachnu b'rufidim ve'im mayin lishtot. And you also have them complaining of rufidim. Okay, so these are two explicit, very nice. There were two rebellions by the man. One was Moshe said, "Don't go out." Don't go out. Al-Tatiru means don't leave over from the day before, like. Don't leave over because the next morning there's going to be more man that falls. So don't leave over. And some people left over because they didn't think the man was going to fall. And then al tetzu, the reason I got confused is because I think it's out of order. Al tetzu is about Shabbat. Don't go out on Shabbat because you got a double portion on Friday and people went out anyway. So there were two aspects of the man where people didn't believe that the man would fall the next day, and then at the end of the week people didn't think the man would not fall on Shabbat. Okay, so those are two there. Shnaim baslav, twice when it comes to quail. Rishon, Beslav Rishon, Shnaim, Beslav Rishon or Beslav Sheni? Beslav Rishon, when was that? B'shittechem asir basar. So it's in the context also of the man, that also there's man in the day and the quail at night. So it kind of says the Slav was a separate rejection. And then Beslav Sheni, this is way later in Parshat Ba'alotcha, V'asafsuf asher b'krabo itavu ta'ava. Right? There's this whole story where the riffraff, they come and they say, oh, we remember the food that we had in Egypt, and God comes and says, I'll give you so much quail, it's going to come out of your nose, and then he wipes them all out. Okay, and then the egel kidite, bimbar paran kidite. And then numbers 9 and 10, by the egel, doesn't even have to be explained, obviously, and then bimbar paran is the meraglim themselves. So here you have 10 examples of when Hashem is talking at Chet HaMeraglim, they've objected to me 10 times, those are the 10 times. If we look in the Rambam, in his Perish Mishnah, so in Avod Parakeh, so it goes through a list of things of 10. Right, there were 10 creations, Ben Hashmashot, etc. So there were, and it also says there were 10 Nisyonot, but it doesn't say what they are. So the Rambam in his Perish Mishnah, he lists them out. Aval asra Nisyonot shenasu Avotenu et hamakom kulan divrei hakatuvim. So I think this is the key point where the Rambam says the point he's trying to make is that all 10 of them are explicit psukim. Okay, unlike in the Gemara in Arachin, where we had a couple that maybe weren't explicitly in the psukim, we needed to find a source for them in the midrash. So the Rambam brings 10, which were all in the psukim. I have a chart on page 2, which we'll look at in a second, which lists the differences between the opinions. And perhaps what's more interesting is Avod Rabbi Natan in Perek Lamed Daled also talks about the 10 tests, but here the differences are more meaningful, and this is going to be the key. So it says, Asar Nisyonot, third source, Nisav HaKadosh Baruch Hu Avotenu, V'cholam Nimtzeu Shlemim. Okay, Ve'eluhem. And it derives them from the first pasuk in Dvarim. Okay, the first pasuk in Sefer Dvarim is, Ve'el Dvarim Asher Diber Moshe B'nei Yisrael, Bamidbar, Ba'arava, Mul Suf, Ben Paran, Uven Tofel, Ve'lavan, V'chatzerot, V'di Zahav. Okay, it gives a list of places where Moshe Rabbeinu, when he first spoke to Bnei Yisrael on Sefer Dvarim. Famously, some of these places we've never heard of before, and Rashi in his comments there says this is really hints to Tochacha for Bnei Yisrael. Each of these places something happened, and it's Moshe rebuking Bnei Yisrael.
What does it mean, Kulam Lo Nimtzeu Shlemim?
My understanding is in each of those 10 instances they were found to be lacking or wanting in their faith, perhaps. That they tested God, they were not perfect in their, I don't know, unless you have a better suggestion. It's meant to be negative, right? That something about these 10 instances where they tested God and they did not come out of it, properly.
Like my assumption is the fact that they're testing God is like a negative thing. So.
Right, you don't need to say.
Yeah. Okay.
Fair enough. Yeah, it's a good point, and it doesn't have that phrase in the other two versions of this tradition, so I'm not sure what it's coming to add. Good question. Okay, so it also gives a list of 10. I'm not going to go through the list of 10, other than to say it ties them back to that pasuk of, okay, this one is from Arava, this one's from Suf, this one's from Paran. And if you just look from the third line from the bottom, and this is going to be important, it says, Okay, ben paran uven tofel. So elu divrei tiflut tiflu al haman. Ben tofel. So tofel tiflut is like words of. How would you translate tiflut? Like words of shtiyot, I don't know, that they said shtiyot about the man, so he ties tofel to be the instance of the man. V'lavan v'chatzir v'dizav, Lavan ze machlokto shel Korach. Okay, that he says Lavan is when Bnei Yisrael argued about the Korach. And Korach was obviously an instance where they tested HaKadosh Baruch Hu, but Korach he appears in Avot Ravinatan, doesn't appear in Arachin, doesn't appear in the Rambam. Why doesn't Korach appear in Arachin and in the Rambam? Is what the Maharsha is puzzled by, how it appears here in the next source. The Maharsha says, in his commentary on Arachin, the whole pasuk that we're trying to understand is God saying at the point of Chet Meraglim, they've tested me 10 times, and this is the 10th time. Right, we know in Parshat Chukat there were instances where Bnei Yisrael had issues with water and they rebelled, but those aren't included in the count of 10. Right, when Miriam died and the well, according to the Medrash, went away, so Bnei Yisrael rebelled, and that's where Moshe is condemned to die in the wilderness. That's not included in the Gemara and Erechin's count of 10, because that happened 38 years after Chet Meraglim. So when God says, they've tested me 10 times, that's not a relevant thing to include in the count, even though it's obviously a case of where Bnei Yisrael questioned God.
You said the quote of Hashem saying to Moshe about 10 times was after Meraglim?
It's in the context of the Meraglim, yeah.
So it's before Meraglim happened.
No, after. Meraglim came back and gave their report.
But I'm saying it's not after Meraglim.
Yeah.
In other words, in that period that carries on after Meraglim.
God was talking about up to now it was 10 times.
Yes.
Right. Up to and including now. But not what happens in the next generation, right?
No, if they killed off, if the first generation died off, I guess the idea is the 10 that were whoever were testing was the original generation.
Right.
So anything that happens 38 years later is maybe not part of the count or not relevant.
Exactly.
The connection between the 10 tests of Abraham, which feels very convenient, just like 10 specific. They happen to have stepped out of line 10 times. It's like a very round number.
Yeah. So the Rambam is Perush Mishnayot and Avot. So Avot lists a bunch of 10s. Right? We said 10 things that were created by Nishmashot. Basar Ma'amarot Nivru Alam. And also Avram was tested 10 times, and Bnei Yisrael were tested 10 times.
Today's Daf Dafyoni is I remember it's famous because I've learned it in a few places, but it's in today's Daf where it does the whole 10 measures of X, Y, and Z came down to the world, and 9 taken by this. I think it's in Bukhavis as well.
Oh yeah,
I
think so.
Talking about?
Yes.
So that's in today's Daf, which is also like loads of world works in 10s, and it's like 10 measures of everything, and 9 of them that's the whole division.
Yeah, it's a good point. I think, to your point, and I assume there are people who've done this, that you can maybe draw a one-to-one connection between the tests that are listed here and the tests of Avram, right? The Akedah is parallel to the Chedem. Yeah, I'm sure you can do that. But certainly on a higher level, to your point, the idea of being tested 10 times. Avram was tested 10 times by God, and Bnei Yisrael tested God 10 times. There's an obvious parallel there. And there's a pasuk to support it. It says Ze'eser Pe'amim. So Chazal is like a source for that. So I think you're 100% right. Yeah. Isn't one of the 9 measures of speech were given to women and 1 to men?
It says 10 measures of speech came down to the word, 9 of them women said, 1
It's well known that. It's a very famous.
What was the other good one? There was some tricky ones.
יש also 10 קבין של זימה ירדה לעולם, 9 נטלה ערביה ואחד כל העולם.
Which one was what?
10 קבין של זימה ירדה לעולם.
Like prostitution.
Well, it was like a concept, like it says like Persia or something.
No, it's ערביה, Arabs.
Arabia.
Yeah.
Arabian Nights.
Aeneas went to Babel, but it wasn't real Aeneas. It was just Aeneas Shabbataya. Which, of the 2 kinds of Aeneas, you know? Gotta ask yourself.
Thank you for...
It's just a great stick of Gemara.
Just come in the room, okay. Or come in the hut, yeah. Okay, so what's the point I'm getting to here? What's the point the Maharsha is about to make? Or what's he building up towards? All right, so he says, okay, ומעשה מרגלים היה בשנת שנייה לצאתם מארץ מצרים. לכך לא חשיב עד פרשת חוקת ותקצר נפש שם בדרך. Also the case with the snakes, the fiery serpents, that's not included in the count, right? ומעשה קורח, because the machloket of Korach happened after. U'maaseh Peor, and what happened with Bil'am, where they, with Pinchas. Right? The story of Korach is told after Ched Meraglim. Ched Meraglim is Parshat Shlach, and then Korach. It happens later. So that's why Korach is not included in the count. The Maharsha takes this as a given, right? And in the Gemara and Arachin, we don't see Korach. We see the last one is the case of the Meraglim. What's the problem? That we see in Avot Rabbi Natan, which has the same tradition with these minor differences, includes Machloket Shel Korach. What's the idea? Okay? The Avat Etan and the Tumat Yesharim give explanations, but just very, very briefly, we look at this table where I tried to summarize these three sources, and I know it's quite tedious, but just in a sentence, it kind of goes through the 10 examples with the pasuk to support them in the three places where this tradition I was able to find, in Arachin, Rambam, on Avot, and then Avot Rabbi Natan, where they agree in almost every scenario, but there's a few key differences. And really you can summarize it in 4 differences, okay? One, which we just spoke about and will be our focus, is do we include Korach, yes or no? Where Avot Rabbi Natan includes Korach as one of them, and the other 2 sources, Erchin and Rambam, do not. The other sources of debate are, we spoke about the Asaf Suf. And right before the story of the Asaf, there's a story of there's like the mitonanim. There's these few psukim of people who are mitonanim, they're complaining, and then they get wiped out with a fire, and then the Asaf comes. And there's a machloket, are those really the same, or are they 2 different, distinct groups in the Medrash? And so we see that play out here as well, where do we count the Asaf and the mitonanim as 2 different nisyonot, or as one nisayon? Another one is, do we divide Yam Suf, as we saw in Erchin, into both a Yerida and an Aliyah? Like, everyone agrees on the Yerida because it's a pasuk explicit. I mean, but do we include that teaching of, also, spit them out onto the land, or is that not something that we include? That's another source of debate. And then there's just a debate about whether you include Mara as a separate point or as not. But the table summarizes them all nicely. The subtle differences between them. They agree on the 70% of them. But let's go back to our question now. What about Machloket Shel Korach? That seems to be a real problem. How can Avot Rabbi Natan say Lavan za Machloket Shel Korach? So, Avad Eitan.
It is a big one. Some of the other ones feel like they're doubles, whereas Korach is like a huge.
Korach's a big difference, right? The other ones might be, yeah, right. I agree.
But the Korach looks like this should be one of everyone's Korach, like in the list of 10.
Or if you accept the Maharsha, it should be on no ones because it came afterwards. Right?
It was the same generation. It wasn't like ages later, wasn't it? Moshe was still.
No, Korach was within the first. I think.
We don't know when Korach was.
Korach was after Meraglim.
Korach is written in the Torah after the Meraglim, but we're not told when it happened. There's no way to date where it happened, and there's no way to date when it happened.
Which parasha is the actual jump of the 38 years?
Chukat.
Okay.
It's like this. There's Ched Meraglim, okay? Then there's the story of Korach in the Torah. Good. So that we're getting there. That you're touching on the key point here, I think. How can they debate whether Korach's included? If you say Korach chronologically came before Ched Meraglim, of course you'd have to include it because it's Korach.
It's interesting.
But if it came after, of course you wouldn't, like the Maharsha claims. Perhaps that's what's going on here.
This might just be me. In my head, it was always like, maybe it's because of the argument he makes, but it feels like it was an immediate thing. Like they set up their desert routine. Yeah. And then Moshe was like in charge, and Aaron was a Kohen. And maybe it's just a kid, I grew up thinking like that. Then he stands up and he's like, yeah, what the heck, why are you guys running everything?
Before. Yeah.
It feels like before. We don't know much about after. Meraglim mess up, and then they stay for ages long in the desert.
Right.
And then we don't know a lot of what happens then.
Right.
So if Korach was then I'm surprised. Good. I don't know, it feels like it should be before.
Very good. We're going to get into this. Really, what I think, and this is already my chiddush, I would say, and based on the Mefarshim Katonti, but I think the real chiddush behind whether you include Korach here or not is a vachlokas ultimately about what was Korach about,
right.
And why was Korach rebelling, and what was motivating him.
Then we say that it was genuine, genuine. It wasn't that he was just trying to usurp. He genuinely felt that it was the right. Like he was coming with good intentions. It wasn't necessarily going against Hashem. Because
There's different
sometimes
opinions.
You do the wrong thing
Yeah.
for what you perceive to be the right reason.
That is one approach. You're right.
Just like what I think was David HaMelech. He also did the same thing with he saw that what his general, wasn't it? And because he saw that he was destined to marry not so versed in the Tanakh, but it's a similar thing.
No,
So he also he saw it was like the right thing, he had good intentions, but he ultimately was doing the wrong thing, not what Hashem wanted him to do.
You are correct. I think that's one approach to Korach, that when he said Ki kol adat kulam kadoshim, he really believed that. There are other approaches in the Medrash which say he used that as a pretext to rile up the people, but he himself just wanted power. There's different ways to understand Korach, but you're right. I think that is one approach, and it certainly has its sources. I do want to build up my argument now, and you guys are alluding to kind of the pieces of it, but let's kind of go through it more methodologically. So, Avad Eitan is a commentary on our Gemara in Arachin. So I brought here the screenshots of all of it. I'll try to tell you where to skip to, because we don't have to read the whole thing. If we start all the way on the right side here, where it says Tanya Amar Rabbi Yehuda Aser Nisyonot. Okay? So Rabbi Yehuda is the one who this teaching is brought in the name of. Okay? So Avad Eitan says, Hatosvot Yom Tov Be'avot Hiksha De'amai Lo Chashiv Lemit'onenim V'tiret Zesfir Le Demit'onenim V'asafsuf Chad Inyanehu. Okay, so the Gemara in Erichin teaches the mit'onenim, the asafsuf, only one time, right? If we go back to our table, and he asks, why doesn't it count it as twice? And the answer given by the Tosfot Yom Tov is because Rabbi Yehuda must hold that the mit'onenim and the asafsuf were the same and not two separate instances, which, as we said, is a machloket in the Medrash, because they're written one right after the other, even though they're written as two distinct stories. If you skip to the last line here on this first column, v'yesh li l'hakshot. So now the Avat Eitan is asking, V'yesh li lakshot al Tosfot Yom Tov. T'efshar lomar ken, zeh kaiminan kan daliba de Rabbi Yehuda, ve'Rabbi Yehuda savar demit'onenim kodem hakamat hamishkan haya. K'yidila bi'al kol Shimoni parshat Shmini. So we know from a totally different medrash that Rabbi Yehuda held the mit'onenim happened before the Mishkan. So if that's the case, it can't be that the mit'onenim and the asafsuf are exactly the same, because the asafsuf for sure had to have happened after hakamat hamishkan. ואם כן, איך אפשר לומר, דהו חד עם אספסוף, ואם כן, נצטרך לומר, גם זה היה קודם הקמת המשכן, בסיני. But we know that אספסוף happens after they leave Har Sinai, so that can't be the case. וזה ודאי אינו, אחרי עקבות התאווה, היה בנסיעתם מהר סיני, כמו שמפורש בפרשת מסעי. Okay, and basically, we can skip to the last column, which I see is actually backwards for some reason in the screenshot. So we can't read that unless someone is able to read backwards. Whoopsie.
How did you manage that?
I think it must have just been an error in the copy-paste. But I have written here what he basically says. I'll try to summarize in English, even though I can't read it inside backwards, at least easily. Oh, you're going to reverse it? Okay. All right. Fine. Yeah. Look at this guy. Okay. Okay. And then it says, Ella demai dechash. So towards the end of the comments of the Avat Eitan, he says, Ella demai dechashav. Right. If you want to, it's the like 10 lines up from the bottom. You know, there's this thing in is it in Yemen or Taiman? They used to sit in a circle and everyone read the same things. They only had one copy of the Talmud, so people who learned to read Hebrew literally upside down or backwards or whatever it is. Yeah.
It's a mirror, though.
Oh, it's not mirror. That's true.
Nobody was under the table.
Right,
When everybody has to have a rock under their chin, and then if the rock falls, then they get slapped.
Right.
That's why they learn so well.
That's how they learn.
Seriously.
Right. Not like today, where everyone gets away with everything. Yeah, right. Okay. Okay, so for those who are interested, 10 lines up from the end. Okay, v'chein chashav hatam. Okay, the ela demai dechashav hatam ma'aseh korach. Okay, and now he says, and why does Avos Derbi Natan include Korach? Right, which is the question that we've raised. Lo Perush HaRambam Kain. The Rambam does not include Korach. And why not? He he says the order of the psukim in the Torah, to Shimon's point, it has the story of Chet Meraglim, and then it has the story of Korach. So the Rambam comes and says, you can't include Korach in the list, because it comes after Chet Meraglim. Avos Derbi Natan, who includes Korach, must have said, Ein Mukdam Muchar b'Torah, and Chet Meraglim Korach's rebellion happened before Chet Meraglim, even though it's written after.
Isn't that a universally accepted thing that it's not chronological? Or are you saying it is chronological?
It's not universally accepted. I think the famous machloket is between Rashi and the Ramban. The Ramban says you should always assume it's in order unless you have a compelling reason to assume otherwise. And Rashi is more lenient and says, no, you can mess around with it.
You can't have that, meaning it says, that implies that he says sometimes it isn't.
You, Ramban?
Yeah, I mean,
he says if you're forced to say so.
Okay, but then that means that it's not chronological. So, like, why would you, like, what?
Why would you, if you're not forced,
yeah, well,
stick
could
to
be a
it?
force. It's like, what do you mean? Maybe it isn't. Like, it's a hard sell.
Yeah. I mean, it's the Ramban. I don't know. I think his point is if you have psukim that are clear, like what's an example? Like Pesach Sheni says. Pesach Sheni, it says that the story of Pesach Sheni happened in the beginning of the first day of Nisan, or the beginning of Nisan, whereas Sefer Bamidbar starts in the second month. So it must be that the first parak of Bamidbar happened after the 9th parak of Bamidbar, because it has dates saying this happened in the second month, and then 9 parakim later happened in the first month. So Ramban says you have to assume it's not in chronological order. But he says short of that, you assume chronological order. Whereas Rashi has no problem just assuming for midrashic purposes. Yeah. It's a good question. If you know there's cases where it's not, why would you then, in other cases, insist that it is?
But Bereshis comes first, right?
Bereshis comes first.
That's
Yeah. So be that as it may, what the Avad is alluding to here, right? The Rambam doesn't say I didn't include Korach because I look at the order and I say this came after the Korach came after Chet Meraglim in the Psukim, so I'm not including it, which is what the Maharsha says explicitly. The Rambam doesn't say that. Avad is assuming that's his rationale for not including it. And Avot Derbi Natan, who does include it, must have assumed otherwise. Must have assumed that really the rebellion of Korach happened before Chet Meraglim. Okay, and that's the chiddush of the Avat. And then if we look at the Tumat, thank you for the screenshot. If you look at the Tumat Yisharim, which is a commentary on Avot Derbi Natan, he says as follows: Ha'emet shaya nira li le'agia uven tofel ve'lavan elu dvarim shtaflu al aman, כמו שכתב רש"י ז"ל בפירוש על הפסוק הזה. וכתבות וחצרות זה מחלוקתו של קורח. עד כאן לשונו. Okay, so the Tumat Yisharim, he says, in Avot Derbi Natan, it says v'lavan v'chatzerot v'dizahav, and it says lavan is the machloket of Korach. That the word lavan is a hint towards Korach, and that's why I included it in my list of 10 tests. The Tumat Yisharim says, what does lavan have to do with Korach? I don't understand the drasha. He says it would have made more sense to say lavan was the test of the man, because the man was white, so then I would understand it. But he says, I don't really know why Lavan would be the machloket of Korach, even though Avot Derbi Natan says that. And he says, "Uvezeh haya mityashev dekashi li'ech darish milavan machlokto shel Korach. Debishlam alaman nicha shu Lavan kishipirash Rashi zal. Aval ma e'aseh lashon habraita einu maniach li lagia." He says, but there's nothing I can do about it because Avot Derbi Natan says very explicitly that Lavan is the machloket shel Korach, and that Chatzerot was the Slav or the Arayot, there was something else. In other words, he goes and he says that it has to be that it's the way that the Bright says it, and he doesn't quite understand how to resolve it. What the point I want to, in the end, what he says is, how do I say that Lavan is machloket shel Korach? He brings the medrash that Korach brought the tales, right? The talesim, and he says, "Oh, it's fully tchelet. Does it need tchelet?" And so that's kind of a play of words of Lavan. That's how he kind of, but he recognizes that it's a bit of a stretch. But
what was his kind of there?
He had a list of silly questions.
No, but no, what was that one?
He said it's ridiculous. Why would you say needs tcheles if the whole thing is made of tcheles? Obviously,
Yeah,
it's
it's
needs
also,
tcheles, so like you don't need
a house that has that's
Full of
full of
mezuzahs.
Torah, then yeah, why do you need a
Mezuzah.
yeah?
That's what kind of questions I ask.
Okay, but the point is that you're allowed to ask questions you don't know.
Yeah, but he's asking for specific like stupid questions.
Yeah, he was trying to get on the most thing and be like, oh, you're just making difficult things for the sake of it.
The key point here, and this is already the chiddush that I want to make, he quotes Rashi, right? If we see, what does Rashi say? Rashi in his commentary in the beginning of Sefer Dvarim, if you remember, the first pasuk of Dvarim is what Avot Derbi Natan was using as its starting point. So Rashi says, right, it says, Lavan v'chatzirot v'dizahav. Rashi says, v'chatzirot, machlokto shel Korach. Okay, that Chatzerot is where the Machloket shel Korach happened. Davar acher, amar lahem, היה לכם ללמוד ממה שעשיתי למרים בחצרות בשביל לשון הרע. ואתם נדברתם במקום. Right? What happened at Chatzerot? Chatzerot is known to us. It's a place that something important happened. It's the story where Miriam spoke Lashon Hara against Moshe and she got Sarat. The Psukim tell us explicitly that happened in Chatzerot. Why in the world is Rashi, who's trying to interpret the first pasuk of Devarim as referring to places where Bnei Yisrael are supposed to be getting rebuke from or to learn Tochacha from, why does he say Chatzerot is Machlokto shel Korach? We're not told where Korach happened. Rashi says, Korach happened in Chatzerot. But the story of Miriam happened in Chatzerot, so why don't you use that? So he has it as a Davar Acher. But why does he have trouble that he needs it as a Davar Acher versus not just using that? So one of the answers given by one of the Perushim on Rashi here, which I didn't bring, basically says, because the story of Miriam was like a story of a Yachid, right? And Rashi is looking for things that are communal instances.
Why did you say the same thing about Korach? Because it was more communal, but
he had huge following.
Yeah, but it wasn't everyone.
No, but
that's okay. So you're saying it was like
it wasn't
more
like
than
it was a group of people.
It was a group of people, but it was a national tragedy. Versus Miriam, which is literally just them. But the counter argument to that is, first of all, the whole nation waited for her. And also, they all could have taken tochacha from what happened to her. In other words, she spoke Lashon Hara, everyone should be able to glean from that a message. So what I'd like to suggest instead is that what Rashi is really insinuating here is when he says the machloket of Korach happens at Chatzerot, we know Chatzerot happened before Chet HaMeraglim. Okay? Because the order of the psukim is they go to Chatzerot, Miriam speaks against Moshe, they leave Chatzerot, and they go to Midbar Paran, and then the Meraglim story happens. So if you're going to insert Machlokto shel Korach into Chatzerot, you're basically saying that Korach's Machloket happened before Chet HaMeraglim. That's what you have to say, because they went to Chatzerot before.
It wasn't all a straight line. They wandered around 40 years after Meraglim. They couldn't come back to that at any point.
That they went back to Chatzerot after they were there already?
It wasn't such a big place. They did a lot of wandering.
Okay, I guess you could argue that they went to Chatzerot, the story with Miriam happened, they went and did Chet HaMeraglim somewhere, and then they came back to Chatzerot where Korach happened.
Big, was it?
Midbar Paran is a big place.
Yeah, but I'm saying it's like after Egypt. Unless it's changed a lot, it's not that big.
Right.
40 years to wander, you should be able to find
it. Fair.
It's not
well, I think also the maps in the
changed a bit.
Dat Mikra, the idea is that they did some kind of loop to return to some of the places that they were there before.
Okay, fair enough. That's a possible answer.
He clearly doesn't think so.
I think
he's saying it's a proof that it was earlier.
The point I'm trying to make is Rashi. Let me put it this way: when Rashi says that Korach's rebellion happened in Chatzerot, which he says here explicitly, right? Is he trying to pin down historically where Bnei Yisrael and Chatzerot and Machloket shel Korach happened, or were they in some other place in Midbar Paran? Or is he making a larger point about what was Machloket shel Korach about? What was motivating him? And if we put it before Chet HaMeraglim instead of after, if the story of Korach is after Chet HaMeraglim, which is chronologically what happens, so you have an explanation in the Medrash. When the whole nation is condemned to 40 years in the desert, so you have a lot of angry people that you can stir up rebellion from, right? Korach can feed into the anger of a generation doomed to die in the wilderness pretty easily.
Did they also know? Because the generation, the 40-year thing was also like, I think people who left in time, none of them in person went into Egypt, did they? Or some
Israel.
They didn't. Right, the decree, they knew they were going to die in the desert, yeah.
That was part of the decree. You messed up, and your kids are going to do this, but you're not.
Yeah. And right after that is the story of Korach. So the chronological order of the Torah then makes sense to say, and that's how Korach, everyone's upset. So when you come and you say, no, the story of Korach happened before Chet HaMeraglim, which is what Rashi is saying here, and what Avot Rabbi Natan argued by having it on the list of things that had already happened by Chet HaMeraglim, what could the motivation for Korach have been? What I'd like to suggest is the following. That if you say it happened in Chatzerot, we're really going over time. Okay, if you say it happened in Chatzerot, so what happened? What do we know happened in Chatzerot? That Miriam spoke Lashon Hara, and what was Chet HaMeraglim ultimately? Lashon Hara, what was Machloket shel Korach ultimately? That Korach's real rebellion was about the authority of Moshe Rabbeinu, right? It says, Moshe Rabbeinu, "Madua titnasu al kahal Hashem." You come and you say, I'm the king, my brother's the Kohen Gadol. That was Korach's ultimate claim, right? Up until the story of Korach, there's a lot of instances where Bnei Yisrael get upset about Hashem and they argue, but no one ever challenged Moshe's authority before Korach in that way. If we look at the Psukim, they came to him and said, they argued with him, we don't have food, but they never said, Moshe, you shouldn't be in charge, right? He took them out of Egypt. Everyone, until Korach came and said, who are you to lead over us, right? Perhaps, where did they get the authority, as it were, to challenge Moshe's authority?
The gumption.
His own sister coming and speaking Lashon Hara about him opens the dam for Korach to come and speak Lashon Hara about Moshe.
Like Amalek, that they were the first ones to attack us, and because of that, everyone else.
Shkoyach. I was about to say that. Shkoyach. There's a medrash about Amalek that it's an ambatya harotachat, that you have this hot bath. Everyone's afraid to go in. Amalek goes in, they get burned. They get boiled. Their skin burns off. But now everybody else is like, you know what? That thing that's totally taboo that no one would ever think of doing. Now that taboo has been broken. It's not just a fringe opinion. It's something that can be discussed. And that's exactly what I'd like to argue. That when Miriam came and said, Moshe Rabbeinu, we're all Nevi'im. I'm also a Nevi'ah. Aaron, you're a Navi. What makes Moshe Rabbeinu so special? That they took Moshe as being removed and like unassailable and took that away by challenging him as being different from everybody else. And that happened in Chatzirot. So Miriam gets Sarat. She's quarantined. Everybody's waiting for her for a week. And Rashi says, and that's where Korach's rebellion happens, because Korach is able to pick up on that.
So while they were waiting for Miriam.
Yeah.
Or either way, even if it wasn't that way at that point.
Meaning, right, as a result of that. And that really teaches you the danger. Yeah, go ahead.
I think it works backwards as well on Miriam. Like, it's already a bad story for her, and she learns her lesson. But like, if you learn it this way, it's like, she made real waves.
Right. And it might help explain why God's reaction was so severe, right? In other words, okay, she says Lashon Hara against Moshe, you're not really sure what it is, and then she gets punished with Sarat, and she gets quarantined and publicly humiliated, and the message could be, Lashon Hara, don't think just because you're whispering in your family to your brother about another sibling, that is so dangerous, because Lashon Hara is so dangerous, that it could have ramifications that could lead to catastrophic events for the entire Jewish people. That's how you have to relate to Lashon Hara in terms of how dangerous it is. And that moral message is all perhaps something that's drawn out by Rashi here when he says, you know where Korach happened? It happened in Chatzirot. Not chronologically after Chet Meraglim, where I can easily say that was a result of everybody being destined to die in the wilderness, and so there was an easy thing for him to pick a fight about. But no, that it's about Miriam's Lashon Hara. That's what led to the Machloket Shel Korach, where everybody was suddenly Moshe wasn't this, like you said, with Amalek, that there was something suddenly that people could attack. So I'd like to suggest that as like a reading in what's motivating Rashi with this.
We're linking the two and saying that it's one, or
not that it's one number, but it was a direct result.
Okay.
It's the two.
No, that I got. I wasn't sure if it was saying it was the same.
So
1 of 10.
So then the jump, right, is that when Avot Rabbi Natan says Machloket of Korach happened before Chet Meraglim, I'm arguing
that he's saying that
that
the
ties.
The cause happened before Chet Meraglim.
There's a
And that it actually happened.
Well, there's two things, because one is that the cause, but then you said that it also happened before.
Right. That what's clear in Avot Rabbi Natan, it says that the Machloket of Korach happened before Chet Meraglim. Okay? I'm saying Rashi says that Korach happened before Chet Meraglim, and I'm arguing that the rationale behind the approach saying that it happened before Chet Meraglim, which is not Pshat. Pshat is that it happened after, and there's an obvious reason to think why it would have happened after. So why go out of your way to say it happened before is perhaps to teach this message of, it's in Chatzirot, because Chatzirot is the place where Miriam spoke Lashon Hara, and it cools down the bath, like with Amalek.
Is Miriam's one of the list?
It's not, because the list is of 10 times when Bnei Yisrael tested God, not just Miriam.
Sorry.
The Rabbi Nathan doesn't ever say that these things ever happened before Chet Meraglim. He's using a pasuk in Barim for it. It could be this is a different list.
Fair enough. That's also an option. You saying what Maharsha says in Arachin, that of course this list has to have concluded by Chet Meraglim, you would say Avot Rabbi Natan is deriving it from a different place, and maybe it doesn't feel bound by that. That even when God says they've tested me 10 times by Chet Meraglim, he could be referring to things that will happen in the future.
I'm saying it's two different lists. This is Moshe's list and this is God's list.
You're saying in Avodah Binatan it doesn't even refer to that pasuk in the. Fair enough. Interesting. Yes. You're right. Avodah Binatan doesn't say I'm trying to understand the 10 times by the Meraglim. I'm just saying there were 10 tests. It happens to be there's a pasuk in Cheder Meraglim that says there were 10 tests, but I'm not interested in that. I'm interested in Moshe saying there were 10 tests, and that would include Cheder Meraglim. I hadn't thought of that. Then it's fascinating because it's clear that the Gemara in Arachin and Avodah Binatan, it's the same core teaching, but by having them, one is God's list and one is Moshe's list, it's the same idea of there's 10 tests, but it's totally different. It's very interesting.
That's why Moshe's including Korach, because it's an offense towards him.
Okay. Yeah. Okay, that maybe. Because I was going to ask on your Chiddush then, so then why would Avodah Binatan include Korach but not, the other things that happen, like Moshe being condemned to die in the wilderness or the snakes, and only include Korach from the list of things that happen, after Cheder Meraglim. But you're making a good point, which I hadn't noticed that nuance, which is Avodah Binatan never starts from a point of I want to understand the pasuk by Cheder Meraglim, which perhaps gives it more license to include Korach, which would really refute everything I've been trying to argue, that Machlok Toshel Korach must be before the Meraglim. So it's an interesting point. That's a good chiddush. Okay, so in the minus 10 minutes that we have left, I just want to. It's not related
in the sukkah. The time is
in the sukkah, right? It's a
time bubble.
So
Tell that to our wives when they all pitch up at 1 o'clock in the morning.
So it's not really related to anything we learned other than it's Tosfot's comment on the sugya about Yam Suf being one of the tests. So Tosfot, in that comment, he mentioned something that Gedali already kind of spoiled the message, but if we just summarize Tosfot very quickly, and in the versions of the printed Shas that we have, there's a picture next to the Tosfot where it prints out of. This is in the printed Shas, the standard printed Shas. It has kind of this little diagram of the geography. It says, okay, here you have Yam Suf, and here you have the Eretz Yisrael, and then you have Ammon and Moab and Edom, and it's saying this was the route that Bnei Yisrael took in the desert. And the essential point of Tosfot's argument is what Gedaliah said, that he comes in and finds reason to say that Kriyat Yam Suf was not, as is commonly believed, that you just walk from one side of the river to the other, that the sea split and they went from one side to the second, but that they actually did a semicircle, like a bow and arrow, where they started and they went kind of around and ended up on the same side of the riverbank from where they began.
According to this picture, I'm jumping in. They left from Eretz Yisrael? I always thought that was from in.
Here, you start here. Yeah, they left from Eretz Mitzrayim.
Oh, they left from Eretz Mitzrayim.
They get up to Yam Suf.
They got through the Yam Suf.
They got through the Yam Suf, but they ended up on the same side of Yam Suf.
Is Mara Mitzrayim still in Midbar Mitzrayim, or is it already Eretz Yisrael?
No, it's Midbar.
It's the Midbar.
One second, this Yam Suf diagram is interesting though, because
no, but that's what I'm asking.
What's the whole trap situation?
Yam Suf is the
What?
If the Yam Suf Mamish just comes into the
but that's probably just
the whole getting to the sea and being trapped thing is a bit schwer.
Yeah,
they got to the
keep going.
So it means they got to the bank of the Yam Suf, the Mitzrim are behind them, and instead of going through, they kind of weave around it.
I'm saying
that it's a hill in the picture?
No, I'm saying as at Kriyas Yam Suf. When they're fleeing Egypt, why didn't they just go this way?
It splits here, because the Egyptians are behind them.
So go this way.
The Egyptians are right behind them. They're chasing them. So they go through, and then the waters cut off the Egyptians. You're saying you could have just cut off the Egyptians on land.
So it was something like that.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, so
but look, I'll just say, look at the Agalsi Yavis, because I love this. Okay, and then in that next comment, okay, so he says Kol hatziyur letzad hagilayon. So this whole drawing that's in the printed Shas, letzad tzafon, letzad tachton, ma'arav, ketzarech lamor the parish of the Tosfot, rechot hatziyur. Ve'eno maskim lemetziut klal. Okay, this picture does not map to reality on any level.
That's exactly what we were saying.
Right? And he says, Vonam, kol ma she'amru Tosfot kan eno nachon. Nothing Tosfot says here is correct. Gam tziyur ha'aratzot, both the drawing, ושהים הוא מתנגד למציאות. And the whole concept of Kriyat Yam Suf being like this is completely against like the physical reality. So the Yavitz like doesn't accept this at all. And yeah, it's this. So this picture, I don't really know what to do with it, but it's Tosfot's.
But then wait, what does he hold happened?
Any interpretation that you think of Yetziat Mitzrayim, and what was the path that Am Yisrael have taken? Because there's a real question,
Right.
where exactly?
Right.
There are interesting ideas, by the way, but without getting into them, you think of what of the psukim. ולא נחם אלוהים דרך ארץ פלישתים כי קרוב הוא וכו' וכו'. You know, this doesn't compute, and especially what the Nile. We know what the Nile is. You know, it's
Yeah, it's an interesting opinion by Tosfot. I'll just kind of
Is
finish.
this picture, like they say, is like drawn by Tosfot, that's part of the actual Pshat, or does someone happen to do a rough sketch and stick it in there?
That's the problem with so many years, is that, except for like Tanakh itself, stuff snuck in, like could be not.
Well, even in the Gemara it has like different gears, so I think.
I don't know. This is in the standard printed Vilna Shas, from what I understand. I don't know if whoever wrote this comment of Tosfot in 1200 something actually did this drawing, or if someone did it later. I have no idea. That's a good question.
They didn't have Google Maps in those days.
No, they did not.
If they had ways,
Yeah, it's the classic.
40 years, wouldn't it?
I'll just kind of say one last medrash, then I know you wanted to add to this. Just an interesting point. There's a totally separate medrash about Kriyat Yam Suf that says that there were actually 12 paths, right? That were split,
Yeah.
one for each tribe.
It's nice.
So there's what?
It looks nice in the posters.
It looks nice. You have
Like
12
fruit
paths.
that you could just like pull off. I had that in my
So
Haggadah.
I forget who it is, but there's somebody who asks the question. According to Tosfot, that says they all went like this. So if you have 12
you
paths,
can't.
so one path is much longer
Longer.
than the other one. So he says,
you
and
don't
that's
want
for
it
the
all.
different tribes. The tribe with less people was able to get around, and they all ended up at roughly the same time.
In the inside.
Yeah, so he like gives like this whole answer to explain that. Yeah, sorry.
no, I'm just saying. You think of because it is at the end of the day interesting what was the path that was taken, and the whole the psukim where the where Plishtim come in, and they and the whole thing here is just a little not is just